says it's live.
Thank you for attending today's licensing subcommittee. We're just going to go through the agenda. Our first point is election of chair. Do we have any nominations?
I nominate you.
Thank you.
I second you.
Thank you. Okay, that's the first item of business out of the way. I'm Councillor Scott Pater-Harris. I am the chair of today's subcommittee, but I'm also the vice chair of the licensing committee as a whole, and I'm a Hillsey ward councillor. I'm going to go around to my left so everyone can introduce themselves, and then we'll finally end on to my right hand side here. So first I'll hand you over to Councillor Madrick.
Hello, I'm Councillor George Madrick, and I'm the councillor for the Paulsgrove ward.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Good afternoon, Derek Stone, Principal Licensing Officer.
Tracy Blair, Legal Advisor.
Good afternoon, Acting Police Sergeant Pete Rackham, representing the Chief Officer of Police for Hampshire Constabulary.
I'm John Walsgrove and I'm the solicitor representing the licence holder.
Good afternoon, Councillor Benedict Swan from Copner Ward.
Thank you. I just want to say welcome to everyone. Obviously, as I said, I'm Councillor Pater-Harris. I'll be chairing today. Obviously, licensing subcommittees are now meeting again in the physical form. We haven't been doing this for a while, so I think in the last couple of months we started doing it again. This meeting is being webcast to allow public to attend remotely, so if they wish. May also draw to your attention that this meeting will be live streamed. The public seating area is not in view to use the webcast of this meeting. I just ask that obviously members such as ourselves will remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting to wear a face covering if they do move around. Obviously I can see everyone is using the seats marked with a green circle and a microphone. These seats have been allocated for 2 metre social distancing. The only thing I will say, is it right to call you Tom? Yes. Is it right to just move so we can actually ensure that we are within the safety regulations of the building? Because obviously where there is a green spot, Tom, is where we should ideally want people to sit. I understand that if you do want to have a conversation with Mr. Walsgrove, I'll allow that at the same time, because obviously I know that you're here together. But if you could, and just so when you can use your microphone at the same time. Obviously, members of the press and public are allowed to attend the meeting and record the meeting on the understanding that any of disrupts the meeting nor records those statements, but they do not want to be recorded at this meeting, which is where people are making deputations, which we have none, thank goodness. Housekeeping, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room in public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use a lift. Please assemble at the Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at today's end of today's meeting. And can obviously please everyone use the microphones and just remember to switch them off at the end because we will all be able to hear what you're saying. That's it. So we've done the introductions, we've introduced ourselves to the meeting. Do the members have any interests?
I have no interest to declare.
I have none.
I have none either. So we should just move on to item 3, which is the Licensing Act, which is the premises licence application for a summary review, which is the Duke and Devonshire Public House 119 Albert Road, Southsea. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to the licensing manager to submit the application and the outline application. But I know that Tracy has something to say first, actually, on that note that I think should, for some disclosure reasons. So before we go to...
Thank you. I am aware that an email with representations has been sent to councillors from another councillor in respect of this matter. This representation is for the purposes, or should be taken into account for the purposes of the final review hearing, and for the purposes of today's decision, I should remind the subcommittee that only the material provided to it for the purposes of yesterday's meeting, together with the representations made yesterday and to be made today, should be taken into account in reaching a decision, and that you should disregard, if you have seen that email, you should disregard the email.
Just on that clarity of that email, Tracy, have we disclosed this to the applicants and Mr. Walsgrove? And are you happy with the information provided?
Yes, happy with the advice, and obviously trust the committee will not refer to it.
No, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Walsgrove. I appreciate your support on that. And I'll hand over now to the licensing manager to outline the summary review.
Yeah, good evening, members. So we're here today following a interim steps hearing yesterday in relation to the Duke of Devonshire Public House 119 Albert Road, Southsea. you took the decision yesterday to suspend the licence, members. Following that suspension, I went to the premises, gave the advice to Tom, the landlord, and the premises licence holder, and informed him that the premises are now, the licence is suspended. He immediately notified me that he wished to make representations to you. He has got legal advice, and they are both here today to speak to you in person. I don't think I need to say any more at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do any members have any relevant questions of the licensing manager? I'm going to look to my right. No. To my left? No. So no questions for yourselves. Do the applicant or the applicant's representative have any questions for the licensing manager?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to applicant and their representatives. So I'm going to hand over to you. Is it you, who wants to go first? Is it yourself, Mr. Woolsgrove? Oh no, sorry, I've got PC Rackham actually, yeah.
PC Rackham.
Apologies. Not very often the police represent here, so we have to be very careful. So, sorry, Acting Sergeant Rackham actually, should I say. Sorry about that. I'm going to hand over to yourself.
You can call me Acting PC if you like. I know a lot of my colleagues do. So, councillors, you heard yesterday the representations that were made in relation to the incidents over the weekend of the 30th and 31st of July. I won't go over them again. Because it's safe to say that you understood the representations that we were making. Things have changed slightly since that matter, and obviously you've heard from Mr. Stone that Mr. Yaman has sought legal advice and has also sought to put in place measures which would rectify the issues that were there and minimise risk. I'm quite sure that Mr. Woolsgrove will go through those with you and explain the position of the premises and how those measures will impact positively on the licensing objectives. As such, the police feel that should those conditions be placed onto the licence, that would make the licence enforceable, so that if there were, and it would make the premises more accountable for their actions. And those conditions range from installing a fully operational CCTV system that works for 31 days rather than 8. Ensuring that all staff have comprehensive training in relation to sales of alcohol, to include the sales of alcohol to people under the age of 18, Challenge 25, acceptable forms of ID, signs of drunkenness, using a refusals register, and the licensing objectives. And importantly, keeping those documented, keeping records of that training on the premises, and also ensuring that that training is repeated on a 6-monthly basis. They also include keeping a log of numerous issues, which would enable the premises licence holder to be made aware of any issues at the premises in relation to training, in relation to sort of incidents of note which could harm the licensing objectives. And there's also reference to including a condition which would have 2 SIA licensed door supervisors on Friday and Saturday evenings from 1800 hours until the close of the premises. Now, the 2 incidents that led to the review, summary review taking place, were incidents that occurred after 1800 hours. So the plan that the police are advised would be that there would be 2 SIA licensed door staff on the premises during key times to support staff in making the right decisions and to prevent harm to customers from occurring. There's also been an offer of a condition on Friday and Saturdays, which is when the rest time is from 1800 hours, to have an ID scanning device. Now, that's not the sort of device that you would see at a nightclub, but it is a handheld photocopying device which would have a system in place to be GDPR compliant, keep details of all customers coming in from 1800 hours so that that could be used to identify who's on the premises. Now, we're advised that that's on order and would be in place, ready for very shortly. And the thing that I would raise with that is that where we've seen that item being used in other premises which have had issues, we have seen a very good response in incidents going down, because the effect of that is for customers to be able to understand that their ID is being, a log of that is being kept, and also there's the theatrical element of seeing their ID being scanned by a door person and knowing that their details are being kept for a very short period of time in order to promote the licensing objectives. We've also seen a full Challenge 25 system being applied to the premises, and we understand that that Mr. Yaman is currently in the process of organising written policies on the ejection of customers, refusal of entry of customers, and training that to staff, as well as a written drugs policy, which will ensure that staff are performing the right measures to prevent drug use at the premises. We're also aware that a condition's been offered to prevent people under the age of 18 attending the premises on Friday and Saturdays from 1800 hours, and the premises will be joining become a member of the local crime reduction partnership. So Portsmouth Business Crime Reduction Partnership is a very successful tool for lots of premises in Portsmouth, which are able to identify risk individuals because they share information GDPR compliantly, and Mr. Yaman would have access to that, as would hopefully the door staff as well, so they can identify risk individuals prior to them coming in. They can be refused on the door and not pose a risk to his premises. The other side of that as well is that Mr. Yaman can provide that information to other licensees within the city that are a member of that lawfully and compliantly, and allow other premises to promote the licensing objectives as well. There's also conditions around being a member of a pub watch, and crucially as well, the licence holder is going to ensure that every single member of staff receives welfare and vulnerability engagement training, which will really enable staff at the premises to be able to identify vulnerability and manage that risk as well. So we are in a different position. I did say yesterday that the ball was firmly in Mr. Yaman's court. It was up to him to come to yourselves and state how he was going to operate his premises in a way which was going to promote the licensing objectives, and one which would reduce risk and harm at the premises and avoid serious crime and disorder emanating from the premises. And it is the belief of the police that if these conditions were to be applied to the licence, then that would go a long way to introducing that. You'll also remember yesterday that we discussed the suspension of the licence, and the suspension in our eyes wasn't to punish people. It wasn't, and that is what the Act says we can't do. It was to enable a period of time to pass which would settle things down, but also allow the licence holder to put the right measures in place to promote the licensing objectives. And what I've been advised today by Mr. Walsgrove is that the licence holder would be happy to be able to remain closed this weekend, which would allow him to continue to implement these items. Obviously, that decision is yours, and I've got no doubt that Mr. Walsgrove will speak to you with regards to why that should happen for his client. From a police perspective, if those conditions do go on, they will mitigate risk, they will prevent harm, they will promote the licensing objectives. If the premises was to remain closed this weekend, that would allow the licence holder to implement the change that is needed and is required. And we are then in a position where, when there is the reopening, there are conditions which we can hold the licence holder to account with. That would mean that if he was to breach those, he would need to close because he would not be trading lawfully. That would reflect really poorly, and I don't think that's going to happen, in all honesty, when Mr. Yaman knows there's so much at risk. I know I sound like I'm in the process of defending Mr. Yaman, but honestly, it's a case of having those conditions, allowing the premises to remain closed this weekend does reduce that risk, and that is what we were seeking to achieve through the summary review process. But that's it for now.
No, thank you for that, Acting Sergeant Rackham. Sorry, I called you PC again. Sorry, apologies. I'm so used to being PC Rackham. I'm going to hand over to members. Councillor Magic, would you have any questions?
Not at this stage, no.
Councillor Swan, do you have any questions?
No, not at this stage.
Well, I do. What a shock. Just on training, I mean, I noticed I've got the document in front of me here from yesterday, where obviously the minutes that we've written up and about the instances that have occurred. And I know that obviously you have provided training packages before in the past and they haven't really been implemented. From what you're saying now is that is going to be offered again. And I'm guessing from you, and if you can clarify this with a yes or no, is that if they aren't implemented and it is a breach of the condition, we will be back here again effectively.
If they're not implemented and if they are not adhered to, then potentially yes, because that's why we need those conditions on the licence.
Okay. Also, Sergeant Rackham, sorry. Also, on the fact that obviously we took action yesterday on the premises, there's also, could you just clarify for the people, obviously there's going to be people watching this as well, and for us as a committee, that there have been several other instances that have been happening in the premises in the last few months since reopening, and it's not just the instance at the weekend.
So with regards to the incidents at the weekend, obviously there have been other incidents. Those incidents were not from reopening, but they were from during the lockdown period, when there were the health protection regulations. And as we discussed yesterday and raised yesterday, there was evidence that at the premises there were breaches of the health protection regulations.
I think what I'm getting at is that there was an incident where the DPS had to actually close the premises and ask people to leave.
Yes, that was during that was a decision that the licence holder took following engagement with ourselves when myself and a colleague entered the premises during when the restrictions for hospitality were in place, and there was a lack of management and poor management of the premises in relation to the health protection regulations. And I understand that Mr. Yaman received a fine as a result of that.
Okay, and also I've noted there during obviously the semi-final of the Euros, the 2020 Euros, there was a lot of glassware in there, which obviously you asked for the plastic glasses to be brought in a situation. That's not, I mean, I'm just, sorry Mr. Walzer, I'm looking at your document here, that's not in that document at the moment. Would you suggest that would be a good idea for events?
That from our perspective, having staff trained, having door supervisors and fully trained staff should mitigate that risk. The reason being is that staff will be retrained. There will be additional support at key times from to SIA door supervisors, and that would allow the premises to be managed in a way which would promote the licensing objectives. In relation to how that would work, I'm sure that Mr. Walsgrove and Mr. Yaman would be able to give you a greater understanding of how that would work in practice.
Yeah, it's just more so I think during events such as football matches, you've identified an issue there with lots of glassware lying around, and we know the potential of what could happen. I just noticed it's not in the document. I mean, if there was a recommendation to put that in there, would you be, I mean, from the police perspective, would you be happy supporting that?
Of course. What I should also raise as well, to obviously ensure that it's balanced, what was also stated was that when the direction was given and it was raised, the licence holder agreed to move to plastics. And as far as we're aware, that happened. So,
Okay.
yes, there was an issue, but there's been a response to that issue at the same time.
Would you say the licence holders engaged in the process of when they have to engage with us?
Yes, yeah. I think there have been some issues. I do believe that that there have been issues in the past. There is still a level of concern around the trigger incidents for this summary review, but I do think this has painfully focused the licence holder on what has happened, and I'm sure Mr Walsgrove and Mr Mann will be able to tell you how much that has focused the mind of him.
No, I appreciate that. Sergeant Rackham is very, very helpful. I'm going to hand over to yourselves. I mean, do you have any questions for Sergeant Rackham at all?
I do. I mean, obviously in relation to the incidents that you've just mentioned, the semi-final of the Euros, none of that's in the application, so I wasn't aware of any issues around that. But PC Rackham, Sergeant Rackham, can you confirm you have made other visits to these premises where things have been satisfactory? So when they reopened in the summer after whatever lockdown it was, 3, you attended the premises and found everything to be in order?
Yeah, there have been occasions when that's been the case.
When reference is made to previous incidents or concerns, in fact, the only one was that overcrowding of the breach of the regulations where a fixed penalty was given. It just implied from what you said earlier that there's been a long history of incidents at the Duke of Devonshire.
With regards to the majority of visits, it's been the ones that were raised yesterday and were mentioned was the time with the health protection regulation breach, and secondly there was the chat mentioned around the glassware build-up. You are quite right, that doesn't form part of my summary review. The 2 incidents that form part of the summary review have been explained and gone through.
And whilst obviously you and I have been engaged in discussions over the last few days, it's right, isn't it? Whilst I've said I'm not going to address the committee on the facts of the incidents, it's right, the police investigation into one of those incidents in particular, the one on the Friday evening involving the young woman, the police view of what you have reported in that initial statement is ongoing, but certainly the facts set out in your application don't appear to be as written.
So there is a difference between what the CCTV shows and the initial report delivered to the police. However, it is an investigation that is ongoing, and we're still left with the concerns with a 17-year-old being able to consume alcohol on the premises and snorting a substance that's believed to be an illegal drug openly within that premises. I won't get drawn into whether or not we are talking about offences, because the investigation is still ongoing and there's still lines of inquiry that need to be followed.
Other questions, sir?
No. Thank you, Mr Walsgrove. Do you have any questions at all?
I haven't got questions, but I just want to say that
Yeah, honestly, don't listen to Mr Walsgrove, he'll help you. Okay, thank you. So obviously now we move over to yourself, Mr Walsgrove, to put the case forward.
Councillors, as you may be aware, with expedited reviews, obviously the police have to respond immediately to concerns about serious crime and disorder, as they've done in this case. But equally, you'll be aware, and certainly from Sergeant Rackham's comments just now, that those investigations into those matters are ongoing, and things come to light during that investigation which potentially could either make things worse in terms of the licensee's management of the premises, or actually may deflect from the seriousness of the incident. And certainly in relation to the first incident, as you've heard, the evidence from the CCTV does not support what that young woman has complained to the police. I think of particular concern in what has been written would be that the action taken by the licensee, Tom, when he became aware that she had taken drugs on the premises, was to remove her from those premises, and it looks as though from the police report that was a bad decision, leaving a young woman vulnerable on the street. That certainly was not the case. Yes, Tom asked her to leave because she had taken something which is believed to be drugs, and obviously that is yet to be proved, but that's what he suspected. The evening, broad daylight, she was in the company of her cousin, who's in her late 20s, early 30s, and another woman in her late 20s, early 30s. She was not on her own. She was outside with them chatting. The perpetrator, or alleged perpetrator I should say, did not follow her out, wasn't with her, and in fact the CCTV shows that those two people in the premises appeared to be, as the licensee thought, boyfriend and girlfriend. So there was no question of the licensee, from anything that he'd witnessed, feeling as though that woman was in danger in any way whatsoever. She certainly made no allegation at the time or suggestion that anything untoward had happened. Obviously she wasn't very happy that she'd been ejected from the premises on the allegation of having taken a substance. The CCTV quite clearly shows herself on the street outside chatting with the people that she arrived at the pub with, and then later getting into a taxi, undistressed, unharmed, broad daylight, people walking up and down the street. So I think it paints a completely different picture from what's written in the police report as to actually what happened. That's not to say Tom is not coming here to you saying we got everything absolutely 100% right and there aren't any improvements to be made. Certainly the concern the police raise of a 17-year-old consuming alcohol on the premises is a legitimate one, and in response to that, Tom and his wife, who have a tenancy of the Devonshire, they've been there for nearly 3 years now, they were on a break, so they were upstairs in the flat. They live above the premises with their 2 children. Tom tells me he works nearly 100 hours a week. He's on the premises all the time, but obviously he's got to take a break. So, as I said, it was early evening when she arrived, approximately 5 p.m. I think she'd left the premises by about 6:30, 6:45 p.m., so not late into the evening. Tom has in his flat 2 large television screens, 65 inches, one to watch television. The other one has every single camera in his pub and it's on all the time. So even when he's relaxing, he's actually got one eye on the pub, as with his wife who works in the pub as well. And that's how he spotted, while he's taking his break, what this young lady had done. So he went downstairs to address that. The failing really was of the member of the bar staff, who obviously didn't check that person's ID to prove they were over the age of 18. I viewed the CCTV footage. The young woman certainly doesn't look, to me, and it is a matter of opinion, isn't it, but to me she doesn't look 17, she looks older than that. Certainly, however, she looks under 25 and you would challenge for ID. All the staff had been trained, and the Challenge 25 policy operates at that premises. There's a big poster behind the bar saying we challenge 25, and unfortunately that member of the bar team did not follow through on their training. The young woman did not purchase the drinks, her cousin did. She stood behind the 2 older women at the bar, but nonetheless that barmaid should have checked. Now, ordinarily, where a member of the team makes an error of judgment, they would be put through a disciplinary process. The young lady who served the women has returned or will be returning to university and has stopped working there. That was her, I think, one of her last shifts over that weekend, and so Tom can't follow through with a disciplinary proceeding because she's not going to be working for him in any event, but it could have led to her dismissal. Her reasoning that she gave, because obviously she was asked about it straight away, her reasoning was that she was with the two older women and that she looked to be over the age of 18, but of course not applying the Challenge 25. So that really was the failing there. I'm not going to get into the incident about the Saturday night because unfortunately that is a situation where someone comes into the pub with a group of people, they're not regulars to this premises, and they cause a problem in there, which Tom and his staff try to deal with. Unfortunately, he and his head barman were both assaulted by this particular customer, which he then restrained him and moved him out to the premises, and then another fight takes place outside the premises. And regrettably, obviously those two incidents happened one night after the other, and on a night when ordinarily Tom would have a doorman on anyway. So he always has a doorman on voluntarily, so there's no condition on his licence to have it, but he would have one on. The doorman wasn't there on either the Friday night or the Saturday night, which would no doubt have helped him, which is why when he got in touch with me as soon as he got the notice from Mr. Stone about the suspension of the licence, he got in touch with me. I immediately drove over to see him, and we sat down and worked through the concerns that were expressed in the review, and also about how he runs his pub and the management of that. And so he was getting an awful lot right on a kind of voluntary basis. But my advice to him was we needed to tighten things up with conditions on the premises licence so that not only he was clear as to how everything should run, but all the staff then would be even more clear that the conditions on the licence will direct that there has to be bar staff, the Challenge 25 has to be applied, and in their training can be told, you know, if conditions on the premises licence are breached, that's a criminal offence, not only that Tom is responsible for as a licence holder, but the member of staff who breaches the condition. So it adds in that significant layer of protection that things will be followed through, because although he was getting things right, there was certainly room for improvement, which he acknowledges, and obviously wants to convey to this committee apologies for the fact that you're having to deal with a review and the amount of work the police are having to do to investigate those two incidents, and B, wants to reassure you that the Duke of Devonshire is not a problem premises. This was a freakish, isolated incident over a weekend. As I said, he's had the premises since November 2018. There haven't been problems there. And the problem in relation to the Saturday night with the fight was caused by a person that's not been at that pub before, and frankly that individual's behaviour is utterly appalling, and one can only hope that criminal proceedings follow and those people responsible are held to account, because that incident, in my view, is the one that's led to the possible revocation of the licence, where Tom not only loses his business, but he loses his home as well. The pub company which owns this premises has already advised him that if the licence is revoked, he'll be immediately evicted without any term of notice. He's got a young family, 2 children that live with him upstairs, 6 and 4. As I said, it's his wife's employment at the pub as well. And he's got a wealth of experience, been in the licence trade nearly 20 years now. Obviously a personal licence holder. This is his first business venture. He's always been a manager for a managed house. He's managed nightclubs, etc., etc. But this is his own business. It's his own responsibility. And he knows that he can succeed and can run a premises which promotes the licensing objectives, which, as he told me, you know, I've been there nearly 3 years without any issues, and then suddenly we get these two events, one after the other, which leads to the expedited review. So the discussions we had with the police were about what safeguards we could put in place, because certainly Sergeant Rackham's initial view was that the police would want to ask you to continue with the suspension of the licence, with a view to revoking it in a couple of weeks' time when you deal with the final review. However, it was Tom's suggestion to me that he could put in place all the relevant measures in a short period of time, but suggested that it would be a good idea to keep the premises, even though he knew he was coming this evening, to keep the premises closed over this weekend, for fear that the person who caused all that problem last weekend might think they'll come back for a second helping this weekend. So rather than try and argue the case to say that the premises should open immediately, he took the sensible option that even if you allowed that, he wasn't going to open anyway. But as part of the agreement with the police and the conditions that you've got, the first one is that we would invite you to further suspend the premises licence until 11 o'clock on Monday morning. That does give Tom the opportunity to just finish the last couple of bits that need to be finished to comply with all those conditions. So I would say he responded immediately. All the training was done yesterday, so all the staff have been in and have been retrained in all those issues. The two outstanding matters to deal with are the CCTV, the new hard drive which arrives and will be installed tomorrow, and the ID scanning device which you've heard about, which was ordered today and is supposed to be delivered on Sunday, but if not, it certainly will be there Monday. But as you can see from the conditions, the use of that wand is only required by Friday anyway, by which time certainly there would be a wand at the premises. So Tom would say all of those conditions should give this committee confidence, because remember, you're only dealing with interim steps. So you're dealing with what happens to the pub between now and the 20th of August, not a long-term view of whether it should have its licence revoked, whether there should be other conditions implied. It's literally that short-term period, in fact, from Monday, because obviously we're saying it should remain closed until Monday morning. And we say as interim steps, you can have the confidence that there's going to be no further incident at the premises. So I think we've got 1 weekend between now and the 20th, and we're going to have 2 registered SIA door staff on the Friday and Saturday, which is next weekend. So I think I've addressed you long enough. Obviously we can answer any questions you may have. I haven't gone into the full detail on the facts, and I didn't want to. I probably troubled you too long on a discussion around those, but it was important, given that the press have reported some effectively just reflected what the police have put in their application without bothering to find out any further information, which of course has sparked quite a lot of controversy locally, because it has got a regular customer base who are very upset that the pub's shut at the moment, and obviously have been reading about something that, particularly the young woman on the Friday night, that virtually most of which didn't happen. So I'll leave the matter there. I hope you would have confidence in those steps and can agree with both myself and Sergeant Rackham that in the short term, up to the 20th of August, you can have confidence that those conditions will be sufficient to remove that risk and promote the licensing objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Walsgrove. I'm guessing, Tom, you're not going to be saying anything just yet? Okay, that's fine. I just want to check, obviously he has the right to speak if he wants to, so I'm going to open it up to Councillor Swan. Do you have any questions for Mr. Walsgrove?
Yeah, can I just ask, the incident involving the underage young lady, was the gentleman with her also ejected as well, or was it just her?
he was ejected as well, because it looked, on the CCTV, it looked as though he was also taking an illicit substance. He wasn't with her outside while she was talking to the friends that she walked in with.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Councillor Magic, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Wadsworth. It was quite a comprehensive summary of what has been put in place. Obviously, we've had this since yesterday, since the suspension. I just want to go over the training that has been gone through already. Obviously, training was offered before and not taken up. Has these instances changed and focused the mind of the licence holder?
Yes, and obviously having effectively a live example of what can go wrong it is probably the best tool in terms of training staff. So the training that took place obviously made reference to what had happened and how that can be prevented. And so, for example, the reference to the Ask Angela, staff have been told about that, told to be aware of what people are doing in the premises. So it's not just a case of serving customers whatever drinks they want, it's also about observing behaviour, observing who they're talking to. Although I caveat that by saying if you see the CCTV of the young woman with the man, that you wouldn't think she was in a vulnerable position, quite frankly. You would think they were together. And there wasn't anything untoward in their behaviour, other than obviously it looks as though they took an illicit substance. However, it has focused the mind in terms of the training. Posters have been put in the female toilets regarding that Ask Angela campaign, and staff have been reminded about the obligations of the aspects of the training that are in the condition, so not just about the vulnerability but also the levels of intoxication and people's general demeanour, to be able to anticipate things rather than deal with things reactively.
Yeah, I think you've just made reference to the training element of the Challenge 25 and obviously the welfare and vulnerability side, I think, which are the two things that have been shown up quite clearly in the two incidents that have occurred. You made reference to the CCTV of the first incident, which we haven't seen as a committee at present, and obviously what has been written and what we've since discussed and found out from yesterday is two different things. So I just want to be mindful to the members here that obviously with being an ongoing investigation, we just have to take what has been said by Sergeant Rackham from the incident of yesterday, and obviously you're probably better informed as a committee from what's going on, which I think you can probably appreciate. So
I'm not sure I understand that, because
I'm saying we're much more informed of the incident than we were before, than what was previously written.
And quite, and in relation to both incidents, there is still quite some way to go in terms of the investigation. What Tom didn't want to get involved with, on my advice, was an analysis of both incidents, because even with the second incident, which is, I would say, more accurately described than the first one, but even on the second one, there are some things that we take issue with, but it's an acknowledgement by the licence holder, well, put all of that to one side. I need to be able to prove myself. I need to be able to satisfy the public that I can reopen and, open and offer a safe and friendly environment, which this pub has been for some time. It's used by local people, local families, regulars. Unfortunately, just on that Saturday night, just had a wrong group of lads in who frankly, let's hope they're held to account, because they could lose this man his livelihood and his house.
On that point, I think I'm just being very careful. There's an ongoing investigation from the police, and I don't want us to delve into something and start discussing an ongoing case. I think we should be mindful of...
Sorry, yeah, you haven't seen the CCTV.
No,
I have it. To me, it's clear.
Yeah. You actually identified both the instances as freakish instances, which I have to admit, being on the licensing committee for 6 years, I haven't known two instances to occur quite close together in a long time. Would you say these have highlighted some problems that have been beneath the surface in terms of the training and engagement and the Challenge 25 policy?
No, I wouldn't actually. Because of the history of running the premises since November 2018 without any incidents, I think one of the key issues was the lack of the doorman on the Friday and Saturday, which Tom says was actually the first weekend they didn't have SIA security on at the door. Although that said, the young woman on the Friday had actually entered the premises before, she was there at sort of 5ish. So, but the SI security is definitely a deterrent too. So for example, the group of lads on the Saturday may not have come in if they'd seen the SIA chap on the door. That, for me, of all the conditions we've offered, is the one I would say which would knock on the head any risk of that kind of isolated freak thing happening again. I agree with Sergeant Rackham's view about scanning ID. It's a massive deterrent. So anyone who comes there, who's not been there before and, is on a night out with certain intentions, there's no way they're going to try and get in there if their ID's being scanned and they see two members of the door team on. So I would say it was probably the lack of doorman that was a catalyst for events to get out of hand, and that should be rectified. But I have had, not Tom's pub, but experience, not just in Portsmouth, of other cities with clients, the attitude of some people since coming out of lockdown has been to go all out to enjoy themselves, and a lot of licensees, unfortunately, seem to have crowds of people trying to take advantage in terms of the levels of consumption of alcohol they want to have, and also the way they want to entertain themselves in licensed premises. Let's just hope that settles down, quickly for everyone's sake.
I actually think you make quite a good point about post-lockdown, about people's behaviours in pubs and restaurants and bars. I think that is actually a pertinent point of how people are behaving at the moment. Obviously, you've identified the SIA door staff, which I think what we're getting from the conditions put down is if that was in the condition, we wouldn't have had the situation, because obviously Tom would have had two members of staff if we had these conditions, and that maybe would have mitigated the problem.
But certainly for the second one, I don't believe that group of lads would have even gone in the pub. They'd have gone on somewhere else.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to obviously, do you members have any questions to elaborate on what I've just said? Or are you happy?
Yeah, just for clarity, and I might have got this wrong, I was led to believe that the people that were in there on the Saturday evening were more of like not a private function, but like a group that were kind of booked in there, rather than just a random group of people that turned up. Can you just clarify whether it was a private booking or whether it was just a random group?
So was it a private?
It wasn't private, no.
There was a group of people who came, certainly from the CCTV, it looks as though they've been to a wedding, or so they're all very smartly dressed in suits, shirts and ties. They're not actually involved in the fight. There is one main person involved, who is the one who is alleged to have sexually assaulted the woman, whose brother then speaks to him to sort of say, what are you doing? The brother is then headbutted by this guy. Tom's barman comes round from the bar to interject, to sort of say what's going on, and gets punched in the face straight away. Tom then intervenes and is assaulted, but then manages to restrain that individual and take him outside. He restrains him and says to the chap, if you calm down, I will release you, which is what happens. The chap does calm down, but then other customers come out of the pub. Obviously, you can't hear what's said on CCTV, but clearly people are saying things to each other. And then another fight breaks out between 2 or 3 different people, all prompted by this, or started by this one guy, but other people then sort of join in. It lasts, so once Tom's got the person outside, so there's that little fucker I've mentioned inside where there's a headbutt and punches thrown at him and the doorman. He then comes outside, he's restrained. There's about 2 or 3 minutes where the chap has then seemingly calmed down, and then when the other people who have come out and other people who were in the immediate vicinity join in with whatever was being said, that incident lasts about 3 minutes, and then it's all over, and then they go off. The police arrive, I understand, sometime later, and then arrest them further away from the premises, and we're not sure what happened there. I think the tasering of the individual was at that other location. It wasn't at the premises. So that's kind of a brief summary of it.
That's quite interesting, that part about the taser, because it says the report stated that someone was tasered at the property when they attended the property. Can we confirm whether the taser was actually at the property or whether it was...
I think that would be a question for Sergeant Rackham.
Yeah.
Am I able to speak and answer the question?
I think it would be helpful for this question for Mr. Walsgrove and for everyone else.
So, my understanding at the time of writing was that it had been discharged outside the premises. With regards to that, I personally and professionally, I don't think it matters not where the offender was tasered. I'll elaborate on that if there's an opportunity to sum up later on.
I certainly agree with Sergeant Rackham. I don't think it kind of matters where it was he was tasered, and clearly there was a need to do that, and certainly from what I've seen on the CCTV, as I say, the incident outside lasts 3, maximum 4 minutes. It's not nice. It's not nice to watch, and you know that should not be happening anywhere in your city. Which is why we say hopefully those individuals will be held to account. In terms of your concerns as a licensing committee, having the 2 SIA door staff, had a door security person been there to assist as well, it would have assisted in being able to calm everybody down and not to allow what happened inside to then continue in the street outside, which Tom was trying to do. Tom is a registered doorman himself, so he's licensed, but obviously he was trying to deal with it on his own and wasn't able to.
In regards to the incident on the Friday evening, at what point were you made aware that the alleged victim was 17 years of age? At what point were you aware of that?
In the application.
So you weren't aware of it in any capacity on the evening until the report had been filed, so there was no knowledge that she was underage until the report was filed?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Okay, just I think on the point of the tasering, I think you're actually correct. It doesn't really matter where and when they're tasered. The fact is it is emanated from the premises, and they could be tasered a mile away, but the fact is it's from an escalation of that issue. I get that. That's a fair point. Councillor Swan, do you have a point?
Yeah, I've just got a question regarding the training, if I may. It's been mentioned before that it was suggested to Mr. Yaman that some training would be the right thing, which obviously has now come again with regards to this issue. What the original incident, or the original incidents of suggesting this training, was that just as a matter of course, or was that in regards to something that had happened?
Is that to Mr. Walsgrove, or was that to Sergeant Rackham?
Probably best Sergeant Rackham, if you don't mind.
I'll allow it. I think it's good for transparency.
It's industry standard training that was offered to the whole of Portsmouth. So welfare and vulnerability engagement training. That is a package that was emailed a number of times to all premises in the nighttime economy areas of Portsmouth, and a number of times prior to reopening to ensure that premises could manage vulnerability and respond to it at their premises.
Okay, thank you. I'll allow Mr. Walsgrove to comment on that.
I think the comment is, so it wasn't in relation to anything specific to the Devonshire, it was pushed through Pubwatch and then pushed out through email to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything else, Councillor
Yeah,
Swan?
just one follow-up. How long has this particular package of training been a feature of policing licensed properties in Portsmouth?
We'll allow Sergeant Rackham to go again.
A number of years. So I believe 2017 there was a seminar which was offered up to premises in the Portsmouth area for where it was delivered physically to managers of premises at the Guildhall. A large number of people attended throughout that time. Whenever we have events, whenever we have key dates, we remind people of the welfare and vulnerability engagement package. We also provide it on the Portsmouth Business Crime Reduction Partnership website, which is free to access for anyone. So anyone that's streaming this, anyone in this room can access that and access the training presentation.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Anything else, Councillor Swan? No. Do you want to add on to any of that, Mr. Walsgrove? Are you happy?
Only in relation to what might be a concern that the licensee was simply ignoring that training package which had been provided, which of course they didn't, and staff have been informed about it in the past. What he can't do is provide the kind of due diligence about providing training records that those people have received that training. So I could come to you and say, and this is what I was explaining to Tom before coming here, we can say, well, yes, they've had that training. We can't prove they've had that training because he didn't document anything. And that's the problem. I can come here and tell you that. You're unlikely to believe it because what a licensing committee is used to seeing is people documenting what they've actually done. And that's why we've put together this package of conditions to make sure everything is documented. So for example, having a drugs policy and the dispersal policy, I mean, they have those policies, but they're not written down, and the staff are told, how to deal with drugs if they can see drug taking, etc., etc. But there's nothing written down. So I could come to you and say, well, he's got a drugs policy, and you say, well, where is it? Well, it's communicated verbally. You'd probably say, sure, So these conditions address all those concerns. It puts together his due diligence package, which, the next time he came before you for a variation or anything, you'd be able to see all of that documentation. And so, for example, at the hearing on the 20th, it may be we actually put together a package of documentation for the committee that deals with the final review to say, well, these are all the things that if you went to the pub, you can see that all of these policies are there, and staff can reference a written document as opposed to every 6 months being told about something.
Just on that point, actually, I'm just going to make a note. It feels like what you're asking us to do is to take something that's very informal, to formalise the conditions, to actually make it something that Mr. Yaman is actually going to be doing. So, for example, you just said about training there. Probably means we can't document it. If we were to be able to document it effectively, we're going to formalise the conditions to what he's already doing. Because I think you just said he's already doing it, but we can't prove he's doing it.
Yeah, so the condition requires him to keep a training record, and it also specifies what should be included in that training. So, for example, when the police then check the training record, what they're looking for is a document which has been signed off by the trainer and the person who's trained to to confirm which date they've been trained on, and then they may say, well, what materials, did you use to provide that training? And they'll show them the relevant presentation, particularly in relation to the welfare, that they were trained with.
I mean, just on your conditions, Mr. Walsgrove, sorry, I'm not picking holes in it, apologies, I'm just picking things out. It says obviously the training should be documented and records kept on the premises, and they should be refreshed every 6 months. I mean, how long would you expect Mr. Yaman to keep those training logs for?
Usually it's considered for a year. I've got to say, he'd be quite lucky if he actually maintains staff for 6 months, because, as you know, bar staff are transient and actually only usually work 2 or 3 months at one place before moving on somewhere else. But he would keep, my advice to him would be for at least 12 months. So if the police checked, people's names will be in there for the last 12 months.
I've just made a note of that down because I think it's not in here, but it might be something that we could consider.
Yeah, I mean, if you added records must be maintained for at least 12 months, that's perfectly acceptable.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions for Mr. Walsgrove?
Yeah, I mean, I know you said the taser things are relevant, but I want to explain why I asked the question, and hopefully you can dwell on it a little more. Maybe I wasn't clear when I asked the question, and I've got to ask because it's bugging me. Obviously, we're here to essentially determine whether we should suspend a licence because Mr. Yaman hasn't been able to promote the licence and objectives, okay? And we're basically here to decide whether he is competent or the premises is competent enough to be able to promote these. Now, we're saying that these incidences at the weekend are freakish and isolated incidences. What I'm trying to ascertain, and this is why I said about the taser situation, is it took me off guard because it said it was away from the premises. So not necessarily the taser part itself is important, but what I'm trying to ascertain is whether the people that were at the premises at the time acted negatively because of the negative impact of the licence and objectives and not managing the licence and objectives effectively, or whether these people then left the property, went to an alternative establishment, continued the problems, and then got tasered. That's what I'm just trying to ascertain, whether they moved away to a different premises and they still acted poorly when the police turned up and then they got tasered, or whether they were just literally on the street basically and just moved away from the premises.
Before we, I'm just going to jump in there. I think we're jumping into theory rather than the balance of evidence of what we've got on the table, and I think we need to be mindful of the evidence that has been put before us. Whether or not they've gone to another premises or not is irrelevant to us at the time. It's actually what we have materially in front of us, and I think while I get the sentiment you're making, Councillor Magic, to the point of this committee, the question you're making is actually not going to carry any grounds in terms of our decision making. So I respectfully you don't have to answer that, and I wouldn't if you don't want to.
I think there is a relevant point to make, which hopefully will assist your thinking, because you're thinking about Tom's particular management of that situation and how that's impacted on it. So our case, and this might be an area of discrepancy at the moment between us and the police on the facts. So our case would be that Tom has dealt with the situation inside the pub as a responsible licence holder. He has gone to the situation that's arisen, which came out of nowhere. The assault on the customer and then the barman was sort of instantaneous. It wasn't a build-up of an argument that had been going on for 2 or 3 minutes where you might have seen CCTV on other incidents in other hearings where you can see a build-up, and that's usually where the police are critical of management, because they say, well, you must have been aware that this was going on, you should have been proactive and done something about it. They were proactive, the barman first of all, and then Tom. The chap assaulted Tom, so he restrained him. He used his techniques that he's learned as an SIA door supervisor and got him outside the premises. As I say, that chap then calms down, and he and Tom are stood outside the door talking, at which stage there isn't really anybody else around, but then 2 or 3 people come out of the pub, and then a conversation starts up, and then there are punches thrown and assaults committed. I said that period of assault takes 3 or 4 minutes. The person who started it all off and the people he were with then walk away from the premises, and the incident is finished, and the police turn up at the premises sometime later. The police do not turn up outside the Duke of Devonshire while there is a fight going on. So the management we say have done, the criticism, which may be a fair one, is that they didn't call the police soon enough. Now Tom's saying, well, I was dealing with the situation, had got the man out of the pub, didn't think at that stage it was necessary to call the police because he was outside and had calmed down. And then, of course, when it kicked off outside, he's kind of in the thick of it. His wife then did, or someone, I can't remember, someone from the pub then did ring an ambulance because one of the people was, seriously injured, and called the police. But it had finished by the time the police had turned up. And Tom and his wife did not see anybody tasered outside the premises.
Does that clarify your point?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to summing up. So I'm going to invite the licensing...
Councillor,
Go on.
Sincere apologies for interjecting. Do I get an opportunity to ask questions?
You can if you would like to.
Yes, please.
Go on.
I'm going to hone in on some of the comments that have been made to try and obtain some clarity. So I'd like to ask, in relation to the first incident, which was the Friday, does your client accept that attended the premises?
Yes. If you've proved that she's 17, then he has to.
Does your client accept that that 17-year-old was present when alcohol was purchased from the bar, was not ID'd, and then was able to consume that alcohol while sat in the premises?
Yes, they accept that that's the case. As I say, if, as I assume you can do, you prove that the young woman is 17 years of age. And as I explained, the member of staff had been trained to ask for ID but didn't, and her explanation was the 2 women she was with were in their late 20s and the girl herself looked over 18.
Does your client accept that during the course of being at the premises she appeared to consume what was an illicit substance?
Yeah, that's why he ejected her from the premises.
In relation to the second incident, does your client accept that there were 10 to 15 people fighting over a period of 7 minutes at the premises?
I'd have to relook at the CCTV with regard to it being 7 minutes. I watched it this afternoon. I made a note it was 4 minutes, so I wouldn't want to say how long without actually. There is a fight outside involving a number of people.
Can I ask a question directly to your client then, please?
Well, you can ask it through me, and I can take instructions from him.
The question I'd like to ask is that, Tom, when I spoke to you on Monday and attended your premises, did I attend your premises? Yes or no?
Did attend.
And during that, when I attended your premises, did you show me the CCTV of the incident with the fight? And
Just a quick one, so I don't reckon. Ms. Armour, if you're going to speak, can you please use your microphone? Thank you.
does the fight inside the pub begin at 19:21 hours? Okay, and you showed me, can you please confirm whether or not you showed me a screenshot of a call, 2 calls that were made to the police from your staff members, 999. And can you confirm the time that call was made on the screenshot?
Yeah, if you would like to, that's fine.
Apologies, but this is relevant, councillors, for
No,
your
I-
understanding of what's...
I totally get where you're going with this, Sergeant Rackham, yeah.
Mine was called 1927 on one occasion, and my other employee, he called two different people. Second. $1927, 1930. So it's been called by my two different member of staff.
And could you just clarify that it was 1919 that you said to the committee the incident started?
The incident started 1919, but at that point, I mean, I was dealing with the situation, and then by the time I took him out, it was 1921, the minute exactly as it shows on the CCTV.
And do you accept that once outside there are 10 to 15 people fighting and that is shown on your CCTV outside in the street?
No, I don't accept this because there wasn't 10 to 15 people. There was only 4 people, and then there were the guilty ones, and myself and 2 of my bartenders. We were calming the situation, and then one other member came from inside the pub, and then he aggravated the situation, and then it started. The rest of the guy very injured, he was one of our regular customers, older guy and never trouble. He wasn't fighting, but he was trying to calm the situation as well. So 4 people, they were the one who wanted to fight, and myself, 2 of my bartenders, and the guy called Eddie who got injured. We were actually asking them, trying to telling them that we want to stop the fight, we're not here to fight you. And 4 plus the 1 person on the floor they were kicking, his name is Chris, and them 4 actually they were the one causing problems, so none of the other people, they wanted to fight them.
Just on that point, so there was, how many people from your premises were outside?
Myself and 2 of my male staff, 2 bartenders.
Yep, and what else was happening at the time?
Outside, they were kicking 1 person on the floor, which is another customer. 2 of them, you could clearly see on the CCTV. So I was running there to split them, and other guy, which is blue top, he was holding me. I said, we need to split them. They injuring that person on the floor, and then he started to punch me. So we were going there to help that individual on the floor, and then he started to punch me. So I had no option to...
So how many people would you say were outside fighting? How many people would be visible in the CCTV footage outside fighting?
I mean, 4 of them wanted to
Can I
fight.
just interject? I mean, I'm imagining the police at the next hearing may well adduce the CCTV evidence. I'm not sure it matters what's happening outside because we accept it was a serious, and the
I get that.
superintendent it's a serious incident that involves a
ascertain-
number of people. I've watched it, I can't remember. I've watched it this afternoon, I've probably seen it the most recently, and I can't say to you with any certainty there were 4, 5, 6 or 7 people fighting. There is a group of people outside. There's probably, I would say, 12 to 15 people outside, but they're not all fighting. Certainly in my view of that, and as I said, I noted it down that the fight outside lasted about 4 minutes, and there seemed to be 4 to 5 people involved in fighting.
Okay.
But I couldn't swear to that because, I looked at it, 5 hours ago.
I'm only saying, Ms. Wadsworth, that this incident's been dotted around, and I've gone from 7 people to 9 people to 11 people to 13 people. I've counted up from just deciphering up on 2 days. So I definitely think that there is a discrepancy around the number of people involved in the incident, and I think that is what Sergeant Rackham is highlighting, that there's a discrepancy between your version of events and the version of events that the police have given. I think that is, if I get that right, is that what I'm saying, Sergeant Rackham? Okay, thank you.
Well, I've seen the CCTV. I think you said there were 12 to 15 people fighting. That just isn't right.
We'll bring the footage to the committee so you can make an informed decision.
I
apologise for not raising it sooner.
No, it's fine. I think what we can both agree, it was a serious incident. I think both sides on the table can agree it is a serious incident, and on that basis, I think we need to move forward. How we're going to go for the rest of this committee, and I think at the next stage, yes, definitely the CCTV footage will need to be shown to the members.
I have one more question, please. Thank you. In relation to the welfare and vulnerability engagement training, the question here is around the staff training and what that looks like. How has that training been provided to the staff?
So all the staff came into the premises yesterday, and Tom's wife Sam presented the training to them. There is a PowerPoint presentation on the welfare and vulnerability. So Sam took them through that PowerPoint presentation in that regard, and then obviously covered all the other aspects about Challenge 25, etc.
And did that training include the 2 videos that are contained within the presentation?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got nothing else that I want to ask. Is there any other questions from anyone else for Mr. Walsgrove? Brilliant. So I'm going to go to summing up. For the first person to sum up, I'm actually going to hand over to the licensing officer.
I've nothing further to add, thank you.
Okay. Sergeant Rackham, do you have anything to add?
It's just to focus your minds as the committee. Obviously, you're looking at 2 incidences which the superintendent has deemed, and the police position are both serious incidences of crime and disorder that have emanated from that premises. I think that is something that we can agree on, and we can agree on that those 2 incidences are being investigated by the police as we speak, and there's an ongoing investigation into that. Following that incident, there have been a number of conditions that have been offered up by the licence holder, and it is your decision to make as to what happens next. If you are satisfied that that those conditions will prevent further crime and disorder, and will satisfy you that if enacted there will be no sort of further serious crime and disorder, then you should, as a interim step, impose them on the licence and consider whether or not what length of suspension should occur in time for them to be placed on the licence. If you feel that it is the case that the licence holder can operate the premises in a way which promotes the licensing objectives, keeps people safe, and ensures that there's no serious crime and disorder, then we would say impose those conditions and have the suspension until Monday morning in order for the the licence holder to put them to put those measures in place. If, however, you feel that those conditions won't assuage won't promote the licensing objectives and won't prevent serious crime and disorder, then you're well within your rights to look at that. However, looking at those conditions, they are conditions which we've seen to be effective so long as they're implemented correctly in other areas of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Rackham. Mr. Walsgrove, do you want to sum up your case?
Just very briefly, I mean, will no doubt surprise you to hear that actually the police and the licence holder are in agreement in relation to the steps that are required to promote the licensing objectives, and obviously we've been in discussion over the last couple of days, and the list of conditions which you have before you have been carefully negotiated between the parties and put to you on the basis that they do promote the licensing objectives and remove the risk. You know, under Section 182 of the guidance, that in terms of crime and disorder, the first source of advice is the police. It's absolutely right that both I and Sergeant Rackham acknowledge the fact that this committee has a discretion on what to do for the interim steps until Friday the 20th of August. However, we are both imploring you to suspend the licence until Monday morning and to impose those conditions, interim steps, so that the committee can then review the position on the 20th. I would implore you to have the confidence in this licence holder based on the previous history of running it without issues, and that these will now be in place, particularly the door staff condition. We're talking about one weekend before the 20th, and that weekend there'll be 2 door staff. So I let out, subject of course to the minor amendment you mentioned about keeping training records for a period of 12 months, which is fine, but obviously as an interim step it kind of doesn't really matter too much today, but I'll leave the matter there. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. Mr. Yarwood, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I accept all the condition Mr. Rackham gave it to me, and I want to I will comply with the conditions and I will implement them.
Thank you very much. At this point, we are going to adjourn to deliberate our decision, and we will call you back. I'm just conscious of the time. I would probably say just after 8 o'clock. Okay, so we're just going to adjourn now. Thank you.